Queen Anne furniture is really the first style that we're dealing with where you're going to see a lot of reproductions out there today. Queen Anne style and Chippendale, which will come after Queen Anne and kind of overlap as well, really do capture the American idea of what antique furniture really is. So what is Queen Anne furniture? Well, Queen Anne's style tends to incorporate curved lines in feet, legs, arms, crest rails, and pediments, along with restrained ornament, often in a shell shape, emphasizing the material. So when we look at Queen Anne, we're looking at in terms of what we've just been dealing with, the Baroque and the Rococo, and it doesn't seem to have captured a lot of those ideas. We don't see the bombastic ornamentation that we're used to with those styles. Yet, if you take any of those forms, strip off the ornamentation, you're going to have something that is really mimicking the Queen Anne style. And it makes sense because this is occurring in England, which is Protestant. They don't want the over-the-top sort of pomp and pageantry of the Baroque and the Rococo. So you're going to see very curvilinear forms, a lot of S-curves being used throughout the various forms. Here in the case of this chair, we have an S-curve making up the back of the chair. It's mimicked again in the splat along the back, and then we kind of get the S-curve again in the cabriole leg. Now, we see English and American Queen Anne style. Oftentimes, the English style will be mahogany, and we don't have the use of stretcher bars. The reason is, of course, if we start incorporating stretcher bars, it kind of nullifies the use of mahogany, being a very strong, sturdy wood, as we've discussed. But in the United States, where you're using other materials, frequently you will see the use of those stretchers. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. There are English examples with stretchers, there are American examples without, but it is a good general guide. Also, the American versions tend to be a little more squared off than the English versions, where the seat tends to be very curvilinear. We see a lot of decoration in the legs, frequently in the knee of the cabriole leg, and we kind of touched on this in Baroque and Rococo motifs. We will see the use of cases. Now, unlike what we saw from the Rococo, from the Continent, and from the Baroque, what we're seeing here is something much simpler. You do have some of those curvilinear forms that will develop. We will occasionally see, for example, that baume style of the base of a case. For example, here you can see it in the legs, in the cabriole legs, but you can imagine that as a base with a couple of drawers underneath it. We will also see typically a curved top with a bonnet decoration at the very top of it. Otherwise, things tend to be fairly simple. They're going to concentrate on showing off the grain of the wood rather than a sense of ornamentation. The Queen Anne chair tends to be very curvilinear, and we're going to be comparing this to the Chippendale when we talk about Chippendale, but you see how the seat curves around. Everything about the chair back is curved and curvilinear. We have a very simple back to it, where it actually comes across and just kind of curves over in the shoulder. And yet this back is going to run continuously down to the leg, which may or may not be finished by the time it gets down to the foot. In Queen Anne, we generally will see a claw and ball, or we might see a pad foot. And of course, there's a variety of different forms that we see in chairs. I'm adding this just so that you have the vocabulary, or can start to develop the vocabulary of these chair types and the various forms that they take on. For example, the Queen Anne chair that we're looking at is a fiddleback chair, or would be referred to as a fiddleback chair, because the splat is taking on that fiddle-like form. Now, how do we determine Queen Anne furniture? Generally, you're looking for the curved cabriole leg, a pad or a ball and claw foot. Some kind of fan or shell embellishment is very, very common in Queen Anne. They're taking this from the French, primarily during the Renaissance. The English are frequently stylistically a little bit behind the French and tend to be a little less ostentatious when it comes to decoration. We also see a lot of walnut, cherry, or maple being used, and the dates will be important. So in England, we see 1720 to 1750. In the US, it could be 1720 to as late as 1800. The US tends to hold on to these forms a lot later, and the dates that I gave you, about 1700 to 1730, covers the reign of Queen Anne up until Chippendale really starts to take over. But again, these things are up for dispute on a regular basis. What exactly the years of Queen Anne are, what exactly the years of Chippendale are, because these forms develop slowly over time. They don't wake up one day and go, hey, today we're Queen Anne.